When hinges creak in doorless chambers, and strange and frightening sounds echo through the halls. Whenever candlelights flicker where the air is still, that is the time when ghosts are present, practicing their terror with ghoulish delight. Welcome to the Haunted Mansion. There are several prominent ghosts who have retired here from creepy old crypts all around the world, like our mumbling mummy or the Gorgon Medusa. And while there is room for 1,000 happy haunts, we can't open our doors to every Tom, Dick, and Cadaver Dan. The Haunted Mansion is somewhat exclusive, and not every body will make the cut. That said, our creepy crypt is honored to have welcomed some notorious figures, as well as several more pedestrian poltergeists, and even a few visiting foolish mortals from time to time.
A thumping sound attracted my attention. It came from the unfinished attic. There in the darkened room stood a ghostly bride.
Over the years, the Haunted Mansion has taken in its fair share of corpse brides, including the Beating Heart Bride and the infamous Black Widow Bride. In truth, there was an amorous applicant who desired to retire at our ghostly retreat years before we even opened the doors. She could have been the original bride of the Haunted Mansion, and her name was Mademoiselle Vampire. When plans were first laid out for the Haunted Mansion, Walt Disney looked to his Imagineers to curate a collection of happy haunts. Ken Anderson would be the mastermind responsible for the earliest incarnation of the manor. One of the iterations he'd envisioned would have welcomed the unliving legend of Sleepy Hollow to our ghostly retreat. After all, Mr. Toad already had his wild ride. Maybe it was time for the Headless Horseman to host an attraction as well. Here is how the scene may have played out according to Anderson.
The clouds will obscure the moon, and distant flashes of lightning and sounds of thunder will next be heard. While the sky is darkening, the ghostly apparition of the Headless Horseman will fade into view, or appear from behind a distant tree, and gallop towards the graveyard and house, from right to left foreground. He will disappear behind some trees to the left, but the sound of his horse's approaching hoofbeats will continue to grow louder. Suddenly, he bursts into view in the courtyard just outside the windows and gallops across from left to right, reining to a noisy halt just out of view below the balcony on our right.
The arrival of the Headless Horseman would have signaled the beginning of a very special celebration. Happy haunts materialize for a matrimony of the macabre.
A bolt of lightning against the sky and a werewolf's howl signal the appearance of the ghosts rising from the tombs. First one, then two, and more, until ghosts are materializing from the earth around the tombs, as well as the tombs themselves.
As guests arrive in a paranormal procession, they welcome any curious visitors wandering about the mansion to join in the ceremony. Our groom goes by the alias Monsieur Boogeyman. That name is somewhat notorious. Legends of the Boogeyman have appeared in folklore throughout the globe, and typically these stories describe a creature responsible for punishing children for misbehaving. Some say he'd stay hidden under their beds. Other stories describe a frightening figure hidden in your closet. This fascination for the Boogeyman continued into modern times as well. He'd appear in film as well as animation. While the name and the spelling could vary, the boogeyman is always scary.
When Mr. Oogie Boogie says, "There's trouble close at hand," you'd better pay attention now, 'cause he's the boogeyman.
Of course, you're probably wondering who'd accept an engagement from such a frightening figure. While her name is Mademoiselle Vampire, and while it sounds like she could be a member of the undead, Ken Anderson never gave any indication that she survived off the blood of the living. What we do know about this ghoulish bride is that as the wedding day approached, she'd become more and more concerned about the impending nuptial, perhaps dreading she wouldn't cut it as the wife of the boogeyman. As the hour grew close, the boogeyman's friends began to arrive. Creepy creeps with eerie eyes, wedding guests materialized. It's what you might call a veritable who's who of the haunting elite. Now, we've already discussed this first guest, Roman Emperor Julius Caesar, who currently resides in the Haunted Mansion. Surely you all remember Great Caesar's ghost. Animation fans will likely recognize this next pack of poltergeists. The Lonesome Ghosts first appeared in the 1937 short of the same name. This quartet of antagonists would certainly make for a fun and unpredictable element of any wedding party. Next, it would seem that Frankenstein's monster received an invite to the celebration. Originally, the creature first appeared in Mary Shelley's book Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus. The book was published in 1818 and tells the story of a mad scientist whose desire to play God winds up creating a monster.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Over a century later, Frankenstein's monster would wind up one of the biggest names in cinema. Actor Boris Karloff became infamous for the role and would go on to horrify film enthusiasts in Universal's The Mummy, and in 1953's
Bud Abbott and Lou Costello meet Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, co-starring Boris Karloff, twice as menacing as ever. Terror becomes turmoil and the laughs get terrific when Bud and Lou trap the beast among a bevy of beauties and get lost in a house of horrors that would frighten even Frankenstein.
Come on! Come on! Come on, we can catch the monster! Give me a hand! Come on!
While designing the mansion, Ken Anderson drew this terrifying image illustrating the creature as he would have appeared in our ghostly retreat. Today, Frankenstein's monster remains tremendously popular, inspiring even more films, comic books, as well as breakfast.
Our visitor. Perhaps he'd like a monster for breakfast today.
The real Frankenstein!
This monster's not on the menu.
What Frankenberry cereal is? Strawberry flavored marshmallows? It's part of his complete breakfast.
Good.
How about a monster for breakfast today?
Of course, if Frankenstein's monster received an invite, it should come as no surprise that Dracula would show up as well. Unlike his horrific cohort, the Count decided to retire at the mansion and can still be found there today. But perhaps that's a story for another time. Eventually, Sleepy Hollow's most famous resident decided to make an appearance, and no, I'm not talking about Ichabod. The Headless Horseman went on to fill out the wedding party for this unholy matrimony. Oh, but let's not forget about the small group of foolish mortals caught in the wrong place at the right time. You're invited to partake in all the fantastic festivities. Then, Just as the big moment arrives, Mademoiselle Vampire gets cold feet. It's actually a common trait amongst the cadaverous company of the Haunted Mansion, but in this case, our bride began to have second thoughts. After she jilts Monsieur Boogeyman at the altar, chaos erupts in the Haunted Mansion. Now, in some versions of the tale, Mademoiselle Vampire stands in a dimly lit corridor and literally loses her head right before the ceremony. With all the disorder and disarray, it becomes necessary for the living to vacate the mansion. Please, be careful as you exit your doom buggy, and look alive, or you too might find yourself a permanent resident of our ghostly retreat. But before you go, we'd like to hear from you. Are there any grim-grinning ghosts or infamous haunts you'd like to see added to the Haunted Mansion? Tell us your thoughts in the comments section below. And why not take a moment to watch one of these other films highlighting the residents of the Haunted Mansion?